Welcome to the ecoChristian podcast, where we're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. With me, your host, Caleb Cray Haynes. Friends, it is a very special day today. Today is what we like to call in the biz a double dipper. And unbelievably, y'all, the long-awaited, highly anticipated new book, Earthbound Christian, has just been released. So much fun, y'all. This book has been just such a joy to create, a labor of love that honestly has been in the works for multiple years and is somehow in the universe now available through simply clicking a button. Unreal, right? The world is a wild place. And so I'm just so grateful to be able to share this new book of mine with you guys. So grateful for those of you who have supported this work and been a part of launching this creative work into the world. And so I just wanted to share briefly this straight from the back cover. In an age held captive by AI, space capitalism, and unlimited everything, what if the flourishing life we are made for is not out there, but down here on Earth? What if being finite, limited, earthy people is exactly what God wants us to be? What if we are created to be heaven-bound and earth-bound? This is a book about being human on Earth, the Christian faith, society's fascination with technology, the worship of economic growth, the insights of indigenous peoples, and American values. It is a book about discovering what true progress is as we learn from gravity, stars, soil, and the wisdom of God in creation. The lives we are created for are meant to offer healing for God's world, and in that place of renewal is a better future than we can imagine. Woo! Man, y'all, I'm just so pumped. Earthbound Christian, flourishing within limits in the age of infinite growth. Out now. It's clickable. So there it is. Okay, but like I said, double dipper. It gets even better if you can believe it somehow, because today I'm sitting down with my new friend, Brian McLaren. You just can't make this stuff up, friends. For those of you who know, who have been following Brian, he's been writing and speaking and hosting so many wonderful conversations over the years, and specifically with his recent book, Life After Doom, and his fictional series, The Last Voyage, where he's just doing the creative and hard work of unpacking the ecologically tender place we are in today as Christians, as humans. And so he just offers so much wisdom in this conversation, and I really enjoyed just kind of sitting back and hearing from his insights in our time together. And so really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you all. Lastly, stay tuned at the end of this episode for brief eco tips. So I'm going to leave that there for you. All right, y'all, here's my conversation with Brian McLaren. Okay, friends. It's hard to believe I'm saying this, but I'm sitting here virtually with the Brian McLaren. Greetings, Brian.
Hey, great to be with you. I'm honored and excited to be with you, Caleb.
Oh man, so good. Such a privilege. And hopefully everyone is already familiar with your work, but I'm going to do it the right way. And I'm going to offer a bit of a bio for the people sitting in the back who are just arriving here learning about you and your work. And so, friends, Brian here is an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian, former college English teacher and pastor. He is a passionate advocate for, quote, a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. He is a faculty member with the Center for Action and Contemplation and a podcaster with the CAC's podcast, Learning How to See. So good. He is a co-host of Southern Lights and supports a new progressive ecumenical campus ministry network called ZOE. He has written more than 20 books, including his newest, The Last Voyage. So excited about this, which is the first installment in a science fiction trilogy. Other recent titles include Faith After Doubt, you may have heard of, Do I Stay Christian? Question mark, and co-authored children's book, Corey and the Seventh Story, and award-winning Life After Doom, which I've got sitting next to me right now. So good. Man, so excited to be with you, brother. I can't believe more than 20 books. Does it feel like that?
No, not at all. Not at all. My gosh, I love to write. And you know that saying, time flies when you're having fun. Yeah, I feel like it's made my life pass faster because I've got to do something with a lot of my time that I really enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to get straight to it, the question on everyone's mind, Brian, is, have you learned to see yet?
The irony is I have terrible vision. I have macular abnormalities.
Oh no.
So we could, if we're talking physically, we're in trouble. Hopefully, if we are talking metaphorically, it's a never-ending process.
Right on. Yes, isn't it though? We're always trying to open our eyes a little bit more.
That's right.
Than the day before.
Boy,
Yeah.
you're just making me think of a verse in the Gospels where Jesus is in one of the many conflicts with the Pharisees, and he is spoken to them about blindness, and they say, "Are you saying that we can't see?" and he said, "If you didn't claim to be able to see, you wouldn't be in so much trouble." So,
Oh my gosh.
so probably admitting that we don't know how to see is probably one of the most important steps to learning how to see.
Man, that's there's some miles right there. We might come back to that. There's some stuff there. Yeah. I'm curious what's giving you energy right now.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm working on a science fiction trilogy, and one of the things that's been very energizing to me about writing fiction is it puts you more in the imaginative mode than in the explanatory mode, and I think being in that imaginative space is, however I'm wired, it's where I feel I'm at a place where I ought to be. So, so that's been good. Obviously, any chance I get to be around young people, from my grandchildren, my 5 grandchildren, to my adult children, but who are younger. And then also, you mentioned I'm working with this campus ministry network that's getting going called Zoe. And so anything I get to do that contributes to young people is energizing to me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was Zoe or if that was an acronym.
Yeah, you can say it either way. It's
Okay. Yeah. Love it. Right on. Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Yeah, I'm curious from, I guess, kind of talking about your podcast and learning how to see, and I could be wrong, but I feel like you guys are approaching maybe 10 seasons now, or somewhere up there.
We're in season 9. That's right.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm curious, maybe just to kind of kick it off, like, I wonder if there are some things that have specifically stuck with you, or have maybe been significant around shaping your values, particularly talking about ecological wisdom and care.
Yes.
And maybe some, a couple quick things, 3 or 4 that have jumped out to you in recent years.
Oh, great. Well, let me say one from the podcast. In our previous seasons, maybe season 7, the whole season was in some ways connected to the book Life After Doom, but we entitled the season "Learning How to See Nature" or "Learning How to See Creation," and in one episode we had the incredible poet Padre Gotuma and another great poet, and we at one point Padre said. Now, I'm pretty sure it's Padre, and Drew Jackson was the other poet. They both said this in various ways. They said, let's problematize your title of Learning How to See Nature, because learning how to see nature makes it sound like we're outside of it, looking at it, when the truth is we are part of nature. And if we're seeing the way we ought to see, instead of thinking of it as being outside of something looking in, we're inside of something. We're part of the very thing we're talking about. And I thought that was such a great comment to make. And so that would be one. And in some ways, this is one of the big challenges. And speaking as a committed Christian to a committed Christian, I would have to say this is a major problem in the Christian religion in its current form. All Christians don't suffer from this. Certainly all Christians across history haven't. Certainly Jesus this was not a problem for him. But the Christian religion by and large has become interested in souls, in immaterial things, not bodies. And as if bodies and souls could be so easily separated. But for in a lot of conventional Christian thinking, they can be easily separated. They're two completely different categories. But then in being concerned with souls and not bodies, if we're not concerned with bodies, we don't have to worry that much about things like food and clean water and a stable climate that can produce that food. And since we think that God can't wait to destroy the world because it's imperfect, the whole world is unimportant to us. I think that has contributed in very, very deep ways to the ecological crisis that we're in. In other words, I would be so bold as to say that I think the Christian religion bears a huge amount of responsibility for the trouble that we're in. And so the Christian religion needs to wake up and develop, and I know this is the title of your next book, to rediscover that our faith is not an abandonment, and it's not an evacuation plan from the earth. It's a transformation plan of the human spirit and human civilization so that we can once again be caretakers of the earth as that primal identity from the book of Genesis. So those would be a couple. We could keep going because especially this subject of our relationship with the earth is incredibly central to me and my theology.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that whole narrative around, that honestly, we just haven't spent a lot of time on it at all within traditional Christian circles or Christian circles at all, around just acknowledging that we are a part of nature and the intrinsic goodness of nature.
Yes.
And, I've even had people telling me who've been doing this work for years of creation care of like, it's really hard to use the on-ramp over here that around the intrinsic goodness of nature. You almost have to come at it from another angle, is what I'm told, and I just, I don't necessarily buy that, but I totally understand where they're getting that from, and because it's just something we're just so not familiar with. Is even though we were, if you take it literally, we were created on day 6 at the very end, but we're just independent on everything else that had been
everything that
prior.
came before. Not only that, human beings don't even get their own day. We're on the same day with the creeping creatures. So
that's right.
So
that's right. With all the livestock and
and then when you get to Genesis 2, which is I think a different creation story that like two different great stories, they shed different kinds of light. That if people want to interpret them literally, they can, but it sure works better if you don't, to let them be stories that are told to make a point. And if you read that first story on its own, the point is creation is good. It's really good. It's good before people show up. It's good before there's religion. It's good. So that inherent goodness of creation is kind of the point of the first story, which, by the way, provides a very interesting contrast to some of the other ancient creation narratives of the Middle East, of the civilizations of the Middle East, in the times when biblical texts were coming together. And then the second story gives people this incredible dignity, but also responsibility of being people who take care of the earth, caretakers of the earth. They're allowed to till it. In other words, they're allowed to use it for their own benefit, but they also have to keep it. Keep it means conserve it. It means protect it, including protecting it from ourselves. So this is right there in the Genesis story. Conveniently, we're distracted from it by 1,000 other theological arguments, but this is what we need to talk about now so much.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be surprised to find that this ecological thread is just sort of interwoven within all the other gospel issues, and kind of like you're saying, we've done a bang up job at disembodying, at sort of Gnosticizing, I would
Yes.
say, the gospel and the good news, and and I think maybe I'm wondering today more than ever if the work of the pastor isn't sort of coloring in and the green spaces and all the other colors in the text that have been there the whole time.
Oh my
And
goodness. So true, so true, so true.
yeah,
Many of us who grew up in very conservative circles were taught something called the Roman road of the gospel, and we were taught to hand select a few verses in the book of Romans, and of course, in one sense, I'm sure this is very sincere, but I'll tell you, the verses we selected are helping us avoid an awful lot of other verses that have an awful lot to say. And yeah. As a writer, I'll just tell you, when you think that you can select one sentence from chapter 1 and one sentence from chapter 3 and from that weave a narrative that is faithful to what was really there in that text, that's a pretty suspect idea. So this is one of the things
yeah.
I love your image. We got to get away from this, black and white, two-color, two-dimensional understanding of what the gospel is, and rediscover full color, three-dimensional or four, or however many dimensional.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Now I've got all these ideas floating in my head about like an ecological reading of the Roman Road or something, or
oh my, oh
something
my.
there could be interesting. Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to chat was about all of this, and other than you being Brian McLaren, but just seeing how your work has, at least to me, seemed to continually orbit around this sort of earthiness and
Yeah.
have kind of more ecological gravity to it. And maybe it hasn't or has felt that way for you. One of the questions I like to ask sometimes for folks is, what kind of your eco-Christian story is per se, and how has your life or your story or work become a little more earthy over time,
Oh
would
yeah.
you say?
What a great question. Well, I mean, if I were to talk about my own biography, I'd have to start by saying I was born in way out in the country in upstate New York, a little town called Olean, but it was in farm country. There was, out my front door, just across the dirt road or gravel road, was a barbed wire fence, and there were cattle, so it was farm country. In my yard, right next to the house, was a creek, and my earliest memories are climbing down into the creek and flipping rocks and finding crayfish and salamanders and seeing that almost every rock had fossils in it because it was in an ancient limestone seabed there in that part of the country. And so I just loved nature. Look, I think this would be a safe way to say it. I loved nature before I loved God. God was this sort of abstract thing that was introduced to me through my parents. And then when I was a teenager, I had a very deep spiritual experience. I was in many ways out on my way out of the Christian faith, in part because science seemed so beautiful to me, and my religious community always saw itself in an argument with science, and a lot of Christians are still this way. They act as if science is their enemy. I think it's far more true to say religion has been the enemy of science than science has been the enemy of religion. Although there's a little bit of truth on both sides, but I had this very powerful experience where in some ways, what I understood is that what I loved in nature was the glory of God. As the Psalm says, the heavens are telling the glory of God. The earth declares God's handiwork. And so what I loved in nature was God, just as what I loved in my parents was the love of God shown in my mother's incredible self-giving love and in my father's incredible self-giving love. Part of loving my parents was that they were the image of God, and and loving nature was that nature was the handiwork, the artwork, the self-expression of God.
Mm.
I don't think it's coincidental that in Genesis 1, when it says God spoke and light happened, that light was this expression of God, and all of creation were the words of God. And then in the Gospel of John, when it talks about the Logos was with God and the Logos became flesh, what we love in Jesus is the same Logos that was expressed in creation. So to me, there has not. My religion told me there was a difference between those two, but my experience told me, and the Bible as well told me that they were all part of one reality.
Mm.
So that's been there for me. In my years as a pastor, I'll just tell one quick anecdote. I was a pastor for 24 years, and I don't know how far along it was, but I'd probably been a pastor for over, yeah, probably well over 10 years. And of course, what I just said with you, I would say often as a pastor. But once I gave a whole sermon on our ecological responsibility as Christians, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, this is in the late 1990s. She said, I am a graduate student at the University of Maryland nearby here, and I'm studying environmental science. She said, I have never in my life heard a whole sermon about our environmental responsibility. She said, I was really moved by that. She said, but I noticed you never mentioned global warming. And I had never heard the term global warming in the late 90s. And I said, you mean, there was this thing they talked about, a post-nuclear war, nuclear winter. I said, does that have to do? She says, no, it's kind of the opposite. She says, oh, you don't know about global warming. She said, she gave me the name of a website to look up. And that afternoon, I looked up the website, and on this website, you remember, you might not remember the old days when it took a long time for a website to load because
just waiting.
the bit rate was but there was a graphic of the Earth, a photograph of the Earth from space showing the it was the Arctic ice cap, and it was sort of this fast motion thing that showed you the change in the ice cap every year for the last, whatever it was, 40 years. And you could see that in fact, we're right at that time where they measure the ice cap because the minimum usually is at December 1st, and then it starts to grow again. And you could just see the ice cap was shrinking. And I remember that day. It was a day that, that sermon changed my life, not because of the sermon, but because of what a college student said to me. And I said, this went from being an important passion of mine to being, I think, a matter of survival. And so,
yes. Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, speaking of, I guess, segueing into your book, right? Life After Doom. It is striking, though, talking about climate change or global warming or sure, whatever language people feel like they can use. But even now, 20, 25 years later, perhaps from that conversation, there's still so much of a gap that still exists, I think, in familiarity in Christian circles and even preaching. Like still so many people say, I've never heard one sermon in this, and so just thinking about, I think your use of doom is actually, I think, is really important. And I'm trying to think if there is even another word that could have worked, because I think it really encapsulates what many people are feeling. But I also think maybe what perhaps many other people are trying to avoid. And I think, I feel like you kind of write about that, sort of the challenge of facing reality in some of that. Would you say a bit about maybe the need to quote unquote face doom and why that matters, especially for Christians?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that. Let me say two things. First, let me say what you said about many people never hearing a sermon about global warming or about environmental crisis, because even if global warming didn't exist, the larger problem is the problem of ecological overshoot. We're sucking more out of the earth than the earth can replenish. We're pumping out more waste than the earth can detoxify. And climate change is one example of this.
Yes.
And of course, this was exactly what Genesis 2 talked about. Till the earth, do what you need to do to survive, but keep the earth, preserve it, protect it from taking more than it can replenish and pumping out more than it can detoxify. So, and we shouldn't be surprised, especially as American Christians, because look, from the beginning of this country, let's just say from 1776, we could go back 100 years before, but from 1776 until the present, there were millions of Christians who lived without ever hearing a sermon about slavery, without ever hearing a sermon about genocide of Native Americans. So what tends to happen in this country, and this is true in other countries in their own ways, but what tends to happen in this country is the Christian religion studiously avoids the moral issues that really, really matter. And what we very often do is we find other moral issues that we can distract ourselves with. So after World War II, after the Civil War, when we had a chance to deal with white supremacy and the evils of slavery, what did we do? We became obsessed with whether alcohol should be illegal. So what did most Christians do? That was their obsession: abolition of alcohol, not the abolition of racism. What an incredible thing, and this is our history, and it's happening again. And the people who are listening to us, who are part of churches that would never be allowed to talk about climate change because people would say it's political. Yeah, slavery was political. Yeah, the genocide was political. So, this is it's so ironic. Many of us grew up in religious communities where the term worldliness was what we were concerned about. Listen, there is nothing more worldly than racism. There is nothing more worldly than financial greed, and there's nothing more worldly than destroying the world. Ironically, so
Wow.
that's maybe the first thing I would say. Second thing I should say is just to try to give a definition of the word doom as I'm using it. When I use the word doom, I'm talking about a psychological experience that I think hundreds of millions of people have experienced. I think billions more will experience it, every decade for the foreseeable future. And this is a psychological experience where we realize that up until this moment, I have believed that our solutions are bigger than our problems, that our technological capacities and our political capacities and our economic capacities and our theological capacities are great enough that we can solve all of our problems. And when for the first time you think, oh no, I see problems that are bigger than our politics and economics and theology are ready to deal with, when that happens, it's almost like something rushes through your nervous system, like a shiver running up your back. And you say, I've never felt this way before, that our problems are bigger than our solutions. And when that happens to you, that's what I call the feeling of doom. And in a sense, it is saying our current methods, our current systems, our current structures are not sufficient. That doesn't mean there's no possibility for our growth. It just means any possibility for our survival and growth depends on our spiritual growth and our ability to admit we don't have the answers and we have a lot to learn and we need to change.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I was thinking just about, I think that's a really helpful image, thinking about I'm thinking about a seesaw of problems and solutions, and and that sort of teetering to the wrong side, and you also just it almost feels like Christianity. I guess I'm going to say in a lot of ways in America particularly over the last 100, 200 years. I don't know that we really realize that. We're kind of already talking about it, but it almost, to me, I'm just seeing in my mind this image of like a funnel of how so much of what we do and we talk about is getting more narrow. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
all the issues are opening up and going the other way, and
Yes.
it's the triangle or the square doesn't fit in the peg hole for the circle and anymore, if that
Yes.
makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And so what do we do about that except that, well, as you might say, everything must change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how do we totally reorient ourselves? So back in the day, I'm going to say, maybe it's been long enough to say back in the day, he wrote Generous Orthodoxy, and such a good book, such a good one. And recently, I had kind of flipped it back open. We keep a copy of it actually in our Airbnb just in case anyone stays there and
Oh,
wants to get
great.
into it. So, but I remember there's a section where you briefly talk about the distinction between kind of capital E evangelical and
Yeah.
lowercase e evangelical, and how there's so much baggage that comes with the capital E, but you kind of write maybe what's worth holding on to is like, hey, evangelical is really about maybe being a passionate about the gospel and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Anyway, that kind of struck out recently to me, and I'm curious how maybe 20 years later you're kind of interacting with some of this and this language. I think especially so much today is wrapped up in, these terms, Christian, evangelical, environment, or like you said, climate, or any
Yeah.
other number of terms. And I guess I'm curious as someone who, a lot of your work is this sort of learning to see and this movement away from binaries. Just maybe some of your thoughts on how to keep or let go of some of this language, and
Yeah.
especially today when I feel like so much othering is
Yes.
happening in this.
Yes. Yes. Well, I grew up in a form of evangelicalism that didn't use the word evangelical, and it was a form of fundamentalism that didn't use the word fundamental. We were so elite. The only word we used for our little group was Christian, and we were Christian. And anyone who is not like us was not. They were maybe apostate, but they certainly weren't biblical Christians. So this is, and there are Muslim versions of this and Jewish versions of this. I know, for example, many of my Jewish friends would talk about the ultra Orthodox, and that's sort of the fundamentalists of Judaism who look at the conservatives and look at the Reformed and look at the Reconstructionist Jews as not legit. So this is a sociological reality that happens across the board. And here's something else that happens. People get born into a religious community, or they join it at one point in their life for good reasons. I don't think very few people ever join anything for bad reasons. It feels like it's going to help them is why they join it. And then two things can happen. You can change, and the group can stay the same and not have room for you if you change, or the group can change, and you could stay the same and it doesn't have room for you, or the group could change and you could change. So this is, these are realities that are unavoidable. Sometimes we're maybe lucky enough that we happily change together and everything works out well. But what I think's been happening in the last 40 years or so is that the evangelical movement has taken a very hard swing toward the political right. And I can tell you this because I was alive before 40 years ago. It wasn't that way. In the 1970s, the 1960s, when I was younger, 1950s, when I was born, you would have found as many or more Democratic Southern Baptists than Republican. You would never think of that now. I don't know about the Church of the Nazarene, but like if you were to look back, we hadn't sorted out the way that we're sorted out now.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is the word evangelical has come to mean, for over 80% of evangelicals, the word has come to mean politically and economically conservative. And there's even a certain definition to that. And then, unfortunately, what happens is the word conservative means drill, baby, drill, not till and keep. And when you, if you want to use the biblical language, it's till, baby, till, and don't keep. And now it's just drill, baby, drill, and don't keep.
Yeah, interesting. I like that.
And so that's a change. And I think
Yeah.
people will have to make a decision. Some will say, I'm going to stay evangelical and try to help evangelicals get back on balance again. And other people say, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't want to stay part of that. I need to find a place where I don't want to keep supporting something that is that imbalanced. So yeah, these are difficult struggles, and they produce family trouble and financial trouble and relational trouble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess that just surfaced because I feel like so much it's just extra polarization right now, and I feel like that is one of the driving engines of really one of the ecological crises,
Yes.
or all of them, and and so we're in this time where there's a need to be more urgent than ever, but at the same time, the work of de-escalation and altering the way we see and building new tables and
Yes.
inviting people to come eat with us is not quick work, and
Yeah.
so I guess there's that. I don't know. I guess I'm feeling that tension all the time,
Yes.
a little bit.
And this is where I think we go back to Jesus. So Jesus, the same Jesus, said, it's my prayer that they all be one. And the same Jesus said, don't think I've come to bring peace on earth, but a sword. And what's very interesting is when he said, I come to bring a sword, he's not talking about physical violence. But he says, and this is so interesting. He says, I have come to set a son against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Very interesting. Each case, I've come to set the younger generation against the older generation. And I think part of what Jesus is saying is wherever I am, I'm calling for change. And the older generation finds it harder to accept it. And the younger generation finds it easier to accept it. And I'm not here trying to make everybody, I'm not here trying to tell the younger generation, your parents' world is good enough. I'm here to say, you and your parents both need to start moving toward a better way of life. He's calling everybody to repent, young and old. So I think this is one of the dynamics of the Christian faith is that, I mean, it's very different now, but I think wherever the Christian faith has been at its best, it's been a youth movement. And I'm saying this as an old guy now, but I think this is true. If Jesus was 30 when he began his ministry, it's unlikely that many 40 or 50-year-olds would be willing to travel around the country with this itinerant movement leader. I think it was a youth movement. And
Yeah.
and
Maybe Jesus was the first youth pastor, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we need to think long and hard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, with every year that passes, I was like, Jesus died at 33, and that's, you're like, wow, that's just,
Yeah.
they were all so young. And no, I think that I think there's so much there. Back to the very first thing we were saying, right? Of that we're continually trying to see more, and that this
Yes.
whole thing is opening up, and that the moment we close it down and we white knuckle it, we're already missing it. But I really love that reading that you're offering there of that the maybe the quote new generation is pulling, and there's always going to be that natural tension between our sons and daughters and our parents, and that maybe there's a reason for that. And so maybe let's just I'd love to go ahead and just talk a bit. Maybe you could share a little bit about your series, The Last Voyage, because I feel like we're already hitting on some themes from what I understand that are in this series, and it's a little bit different work than your typical work, and I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
But could you tell us a little bit
Sure.
about that?
Sure. Well, probably the first book that I wrote that got a lot of attention came out in 2001, and it was actually a work of fiction. It was called A New Kind of Christian, but it was a story. It was a novel, and it was the first of a trilogy. The second was The Story We Find Ourselves In, and the third was The Last Word and the Word After That. And so fiction. I was a college English teacher before I became a pastor, so fiction has always been a love of mine. But I haven't written it for, yeah, 20 over 20 years. So, but I started writing this back in 2016. The Last Voyage really began. I started working on it just sort of on the side because I had other projects that I had, the nonfiction that I was working on. But it's been just a sort of a passion project of mine for these years. And what I wanted to try to do, one of the reasons I love fiction is that, as we were saying earlier, it involves us imagining rather than explaining and arguing. And then I really have always loved science fiction, partly because I love science, but because science fiction has often been a way that we talk about the problems we're not allowed to talk about by putting them in a different universe or in a different century or a different galaxy. And so, if people remember Planet of the Apes,
Yeah.
it wasn't really a movie based about primate human relationships. It was really about human relationships. It was about race, is what it was really about,
Yeah.
and helping us see difference in different ways. And it was also about helping us imagine our own capacity to destroy our own civilization. Pretty powerful things that needed to be talked about in the 1960s when the first iteration of this came out. And so the issues of climate and ecological overshoot, and then the political issues that keep us from being able to talk about these existential threats that we face. I wanted to find a way to talk about that. So the Last Voyage takes place in 2053, begins in 2056, imagining about 30 years in the future. And what would happen if the world keeps going the way it's going now? What if current trends continue for another 30 years? Where would we be then? What might happen then? And so the story is about a series of voyages to Mars that a wealthy person, as we can imagine some wealthy people in the world today getting interested in space travel, they actually succeed in establishing a colony on Mars. And they've solved all the technological problems to get there, which, by the way, is a very big deal. Mars is not a good option for
Right.
there, as the saying goes, there is no planet B.
Yeah.
But this is fiction, so they get there. But here's what happens: on Mars, they begin replicating some of the problems we have here on Earth, and suddenly the organizers of this set of missions realize we've sent engineers, we've sent scientists, we haven't sent theologians and poets and artists. And so we're solving the technological problems, but we're not addressing the human problem, the spiritual problem. And so that's the framework for the book.
Wow, I really love that. I think that's nail on the head. And I think it's a movement from seeing our ecological crisis as just some technological problem, which is our temptation over and over again to I try to say tech our way out of a tech problem or any number of other metaphors or ways to say that, and to shift toward, maybe you said the need to be human, which kind of reminds me, it takes me back to Life After Doom, and you write about being Homo sapiens, and there's this one quote later in the book, and you write think on 226. Do you feel it? A new, humbled, wiser humanity can only be born as the old, arrogant, foolish human civilization is collapsing, like new life rising from the ashes of a burned forest. A new humanity can only rise when the old humanity is falling apart. Yeah, would you unpack that? Maybe just here at the end. I know we've only got a little bit of time left, but is that some of kind of what you're hitting on there with your other work as well?
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting is this process of writing Life After Doom and The Last Voyage and its sequels has when I go back and read the New Testament, I just notice things that have always been there. So, for example, Jesus says, there will be wars and rumors of wars, but don't don't lose heart. The end has not yet come. Now, it sounds strange to say the end has not yet come. Don't be upset. You would think he would say the end is coming. You should be very, very upset. But I think what Jesus, and we get a little clue into what he's really thinking when he says, it's like the labor pains of a woman. It's so painful. But then when the child is born, she forgets the pain. And so what he basically says is, well, a friend of mine, Valerie Kaur, says it this way. What if the pains we're going through and the darkness we're entering into is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? In other words, what if for there to be a birth process of something new, there has to be a death process of something old? For slavery to end, the slave economy had to die, and then a new vision of democracy had to be born. Unfortunately, that new vision of democracy still hasn't fully gotten off the ground, but the old had to die before the new could be born. And I think we see something like this when Jesus uses the language of harvest. You plant seeds and you wait until a harvest. You can't make things perfect in the middle. You have to get, you have to go through the seasons. And maybe one other thing I would add, I think many of us who are Christians have had this idea that God's relationship to the universe is one of supremacist domination. In other words, God has written the script, and every atom in the universe has to follow the script, and the script is already written, so the everything has been predestined. And there are many Christians who are taught that this is the only way to read the Bible. It is one way to read the Bible, but I think there's very different alternatives to read the Bible. And the way I would say it is, I think the relationship between God and the universe is much more like the relationship between a parent and a child. A parent's desire is not to dominate the child. A parent's desire is for the child to be free and to grow. The parent has desires for the child, but the desires are very different than control. And if this is the primary image that Jesus gives us for God's relationship to us, I think this says to us, God wants to work with us like a loving parent works with children to help us learn and grow, including knowing we're going to make mistakes, but having grace with the mistakes so that we can learn a lesson and maybe even grow stronger and wiser through the mistakes. And of course, this is exactly what Scripture says happens.
Oh man, that's really wonderful. It really makes me think that so much of the work ahead of us is dealing with I might say like our ecclesial trauma from too many centuries of that theology,
Yes.
that kind of parenting from the church,
Yes.
and and just being stuck in what we want the cross to be versus what the cross is actually calling us to be, and and so I don't know. I just think there's so much irony there around what's next. Instead of getting so wrapped up in the need to save everything, what would it look like for us to become more interested in dying, in death, and that's sort of the irony of it all, the letting go of like what needs to be left behind.
Yeah.
And,
let me give an analogy that might work for people. I know our time is just about up here, so I'll say this briefly. We live in something called a democracy, and most of us like it. Although, unfortunately, I think there are some people who don't like democracy, but most of us like it. For democracy to happen, monarchy had to die. Monarchy had to come to an end. And if we were to look at the system that's running our world now, we're afraid of something worse happening. But what if something better is trying to be born? A better human-earth relationship, a better human-to-human relationship. What if that's what God really cares about? When we pray, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What if what that means is, may we come into better relationships with God and ourselves and other humans and the earth? Then that is the process that's going to mean some things fall away. And a lot of people aren't going to give up their wealth and power without a fight. And it might only be when the systems themselves self-destruct. But that's why Jesus could say, these terrible things will happen. But listen, these are labor pains. Something better is trying to be born.
Ooh, that'll preach right there, brother. Well, I don't think there's a better note to end our time on right there than that. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Well, and I want to say thank you for this important message you're bringing out, both in your writing and in your podcast. So keep up the good work. We're in this together.
Oh, thanks, man. Man, so great. So great. What a wonderful guy. What a wonderful guy. So for this first episode of 2026, we're launching the long overdue Eco Tips segment of this show. It's a brief tip tucked at the end of each episode to help us think about small practical actions in our own lives. You know, y'all, too often we don't really talk about the small things of creation care enough. And maybe the temptation is to maybe just take some of that information for granted, or believe that the small things don't really make any difference, but really that couldn't be further from the truth. And a recent quote that was shared from Arasha's Reverend Dr. Dave Bookless says, "Our actions might seem too little, too late on their own, yet God is committed to including us in His place. He can take our small efforts and weave them into His purposes in sustaining and renewing the earth." And I think that just puts it so well. So here we go for episode 54, Eco Tips. We're starting small today. Ready? Here we go. Take the junk out of your trunk. Literally, get the junk out of your trunk. Did you know that unnecessary stuff in your car actually makes your miles per gallon a lot worse with each increasing pound? And those pounds add up quicker than you think. And so what that means is more pollution, more greenhouse gas, all that, just carrying around that hockey equipment. Or if you're like me, maybe it's literally just a bunch of trash in your car that just needs to go away. So did you know that for every 100 pounds of weight, your car's efficiency decreases by a couple of percent? And so the same with tire inflation, actually. If there's one tire that's more significantly deflated than the others, the same thing happens. And so check those tires. It's the small thing, friends. And so with every mile you drive, it makes more of a difference. And so something to think about. All right, there it is. Okay, friends. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow the show on Instagram for updates. Hit up those show notes to hear more about Brian's work and also my new release, Earthbound Christian. Hey, much love, guys. Next time.